Many horror games have notes or letters lying around the world to fill yourself in on the past of what's happening in this story. Before we get started on this episode, I would like to say it is important to note to not make your entire backstory discoverable through notes or just reading in general. Notes are meant to give the player a little extra as a reward for taking the time to read them. And definitely don't put an explanation in a note that would be game-breaking if they never found said explanation. Many indie horror games make the mistake of switching between running from something and reading explanations for why you're running from something way too often. Now, you'll want to choose at the beginning if you want the notes to be inventory items. In most games, I've noticed people don't want this unless it's a separate inventory just for notes. If you made it a regular inventory item, they would always be the item players would drop first to make more room, or they might be too scared to drop notes in case there's something they need to come back to, and it would flood their entire inventory. And it would be much less annoying for notes not to take up any inventory space at all. So we have to make a new folder. Let's do this in Blueprints, and then in Actors, and we'll just call it Notes. And we need to create a master class. So right click, Blueprint class of type Actor, and we will call it BP Note Master. And we need to import a mesh for the piece of paper the note will be on. Once again, I've created something very small in Blender that you should replace. So I'm going to go into Props, Meshes, and hit Import. And I will navigate to where I keep my paper.fbx and open it. Auto-generate collision is fine. It's not a skeletal mesh, and we don't need to create a material. Or actually, we can go ahead and create a new material. We'll just change it. So let's hit Import. And we just have this very simple piece of paper right here. It's just a very thin box that I created. And it didn't seem to make a new material anyway. So we'll just go into Materials and create a new material for this. We'll just call it M Paper, if I can press the correct buttons. And I'm just going to make it as close as I can to a paper color. Let's see how well I can do this. Something like that should be fine. And I'll just use that. All right, perfect. All right, so let's go back into our BP Note Master. And I'm just going to close all this lock stuff that we did in the last episode, and I'll go ahead and close the paper meshes and materials as well. And we are going to add a static mesh. This will be called paper, or we could call it paper mesh, either works. And we will set it to the paper. We can also set the collision presets to overlap all if you wish. It won't be physics based, but in case it's anywhere where you don't want your player to be affected by it, then that's an option. So now we need to decide what will be said on the paper. Of course, an option is if you want to completely hard code everything in and just create a bunch of different note models with different texts saying exactly what you want them to say, but that's far less efficient than using the same piece of paper with a text renderer, which is what we are going to do. So we're going to add a component, text render, and we'll just call this note text. Now let's take a look at this. This will create a 3D text to us that we'll place on top of the paper to make it look like it was written on. So let's scroll up. We are going to change the alignment to left and top. So you see the pivot point here is in the upper left side of it, so we can put that in the upper left side of our paper. World size, we'll make it a lot smaller, maybe something like 2. Yeah, that looks right. Let's make the color black. The text render color, I'm gonna make that black. And we need to rotate it accordingly, so z-axis 90 and y-axis 90. Okay. Now, if we were to put the Z at 0, you'll see we get this jittering effect because this is on the exact same Z-axis as the paper is. So we want it on the paper, but we want it just slightly above. But we don't want to see any space in between because this is not supposed to give the illusion of floating text. So we're going to give it a Z value of 0.001. That'll get rid of the jittering, and you probably won't ever be able to see the distance between the text and the paper. Let's also move it to the upper left, unless you want the text directly in the center. And I think -10 and 15 work. Well, that's the wrong way. I meant -15. There we go. Yeah, and that looks good to me. So let's change the font because we don't want to use Unreal's default Roboto font. It definitely doesn't look like handwritten text. And this will require some setting up since 3D text is different than UI text. You can easily import a handwriting type font or make one yourself if you know how to. Since we already have an episode on importing fonts, I'll just be using the font we already imported. But since this is supposed to look handwritten, unless it's supposed to look typed for your game, you will probably want to import another one. So you can go back to that video and reference it. So I'm going to go into Content and Fonts, and here we have our Calibri font. And I'm just going to take our font right here. If you remember, this is where we created all the different types into one font, and I'm going to duplicate it. And I'm going to call this Calibri font underscore distance field, and open this up. The font cache type needs to be changed to offline, and we can hit yes. Now we can choose our font right here. I'm going to find Calibri, which is what we're using, and you can choose a font style. I'll go with italic and a size, and I'm going to go with 22. So this is our sample right here. And then we can hit OK. We also have to go into details and search for use distance field alpha, and we want to check this. Cool, this is looking how we want it. So we also need a material to handle this 3D text for us. So we're going to right click and create a new material, and we'll call it Calibri font, and that should be good enough. We can open it, and we need to change the blend mode to masked. And we also want this to be two-sided. For the base color, we're going to get vertex color. And we need to import our new font right here. So right click and search for font, and we'll get the font sample. And we will just find Calibri font distance field, which is the one we just created. And from this red channel, we will get a lerp, or linear interpolate. Put it into the alpha, and the lerp here will go from -90 to 90. We might need to refresh this. We can just save and apply, and there we go. -90 to 90, and this will go into the opacity mask. But we are getting this, it's just plain white when it's supposed to look like our 3D font here. And so what we need to do is just right click on our Calibri font distance field and hit re-import. Now our font looks like this, which is the way we want it to look. And our font here has gone completely invisible. So let me just try deleting this and then searching for it again, see if that fixes it. Put the alpha, red into alpha, not A. There we go. And now we have our 3D fonts. If we set this to a plane, it might be a bit easier to see. Perfect. So let's go back into our BP Note Master, and now we are able to select as a material which one we want to use, and we can search for Calibri font. And we're also going to have to change the font here from Roboto to our Calibri font distance field. And there we have it. We have our text in 3D. So if you want to do that with any other font, you'll just have to go through the exact same process of creating a font here, going through the steps of turning it offline, etc., and then creating a material in the same way I did. So we can add a placeholder text right here just to test something out. This note is very scary, and the monster is coming for you. And we can see, obviously, that this goes way off the page. So if we find the spot we want to break the line in between the and monster, I'm thinking, we can add a BR in between some carets, and then that creates a line break. Great, so now when we spawn these notes, we need to know what text we want each one to say. So we can go into the construction script, and we will get the note text, and we will search set text, and we will promote this value to a variable, and we'll call this note text, and then we can text like that. And we'll make this editable so we can change it. We can also see that the break will work in the variable as well, so we can type it's too late, the monster has eaten your family, and if we go into the viewport we can see it's updated, and I want to add the break before eaten, and there we go. We've created quite a morbid story here between these two examples. So this next part is we want to make these notes interactable. We want to spawn these into the world, and then we want to be able to interact with them so we can read them up close. So we're going to set this up very similar to how we set up our inventory items, just so it works in the same way, by adding a overlap sphere. So sphere collision, we'll call this overlap sphere. And we'll make the radius something like 500, something pretty big. And we're going to be adding a widget for notifying that you're close enough to pick it up. And I'll just go ahead and open up an inventory item so we can get refreshed on what I'm talking about. And let's just take the key, for example. And right, so we have this sphere, we have the prompt widget, and the static mesh. And if we want, we can actually just copy and paste it, I believe, from here, even if it's inherited. So let's go into Note Master and let's paste it, and there we go. It's in there. And it should be at the correct scale, the correct Z value. Well, that's actually quite high. So let's bring it a little closer to the note. So maybe something like 20. Make sure the visibility is false by default, which it is. And we can also just copy the functions from the pickup actor for when to turn this visible and such. So let's go into the pickup actor, event graph. Let's get the master actor instead of one of the children, so that we actually have all these functions. And we can just copy these two overlaps for the sphere and the event tick, so we don't have to write all this out again. So Command C, or Control C I should say, and Note Master, event graph, Control V. Alright, so let's delete these two because it doesn't know we're talking about the overlap sphere here, and then we'll just create them for this. So on going to begin overlap, put this into other actor, and then same thing here on component end overlap, and put this into here. So now it knows we're talking about the correct sphere. We don't have a variable for our player ref in here, so we can just right click and create the variable for it. And we'll have to do the same for this update actor variable. There we go, now they're both variables. We should be good here as well. In the tick, though, the static mesh we are referencing should be our paper now. So let's drag this over the static mesh to replace it with the paper. We can just go through and see if we have any more times we reference that static mesh. And it looks like we don't. If this widget here, if you didn't copy and paste it or named it to something else, you will have to replace this prompt widget variable with this. Since it's named the exact same thing, it automatically detected it, so we don't have to switch it out. But that is a warning, because you might come across with that error if you change the name right here, or if the name's different in the master. We also have this widget distance above mesh variable for how high this widget should be above our mesh, so we can create a variable from that as well. Let's go ahead and compile so that we can set it. I'm gonna set it to 25. And we still have another one. Here it is, pickup distance. So how close can we be to it before we can pick it up? So let's right click and create it as a variable. And I will make the pickup distance 150. Alright, so we can put this in the world right now to test to make sure that the widget works like all the other items do. So I'm gonna just turn this camera speed back up because we were going way too slow at the moment. I'm going to bring this light in this corner, and we can put the note master in here. Now remember, if you spawn inside an overlap sphere, the overlap detection will not work, so just make sure you're not doing that. We can hit play. And then a note's over there. If we enter the sphere, the widget should appear, which it does. And it's always rotating to look at us, which is nice. And if we go all the way up, or close enough, it turns into an E, knowing that we can now interact with it. Of course, us pressing E doesn't do anything, as we didn't set that up. But we can also, even without picking it up, get real close to it and just read the text like this. Of course, if it's pinned to a wall or sitting on a desk, you won't be able to stand inside of it and read like that. But for our sake, we were just making this float in the air. Of course, if you want, you can we can make it pinned to the wall right now. And I do want to do that. Make sure the right side is facing outwards. And there we go. Now, upon interacting with this note, we want to use a similar examination setup as when we examine objects in our inventory, so that we can check the note for backsides, things hidden on the other side, if that makes sense. So if we examine one of these, we can rotate it around and look all around it. You, of course, don't need to do this at all. When you interact with it, it could be as simple as creating a UI with a picture of the note with the text displaying what it is, and that's all it is. It's just a widget. And for many games, that would actually be a very good and a very valid method of going about this. But since I feel like we've talked about UI enough where you'd be able to do that on your own, we're going to do something a little more complicated, just in case this is the type of thing you want to go with. So to examine this, we are going to change this to unlit so we can see things. And over here we have our examination component where we examine items in our inventory. And we want another one of these for the notes specifically. So let's duplicate this scene capture component. I'm going to duplicate the lights with it. So I'm holding down Shift. And then I will hold down Alt and drag all these out. And we're going to have to change these point lights to movable so that the red X's disappear. So we need a new render target for this because we don't want to use the one that's checking at the inventory items over there. So if we go to Content and Blueprints, Render Targets, we can just duplicate this. We'll call this Note Render Target 2D. And we can open it up. We can't see anything with it right now. I'm going to make the size bigger since the notes are going to be bigger in the widget. It's a good idea to try to match this size to the size you'll be putting it in the widget. And we need an item to examine. So it'll be very similar to our examination item over there. So we're just going to duplicate it and change some of the code. So let's go into actors, and then it's in inventory. So we have BP examination. I'm just going to right click, copy reference, and then go into notes and hit Control V to paste it. And we will call this BP note examination. We can open it up, and the item mesh here, we can just change to paper, since it's always going to be this paper. And we also want the text here, and we're just going to copy it from our Notemaster so we don't have to mess with all these, this text, so we don't have to mess with all these settings again. So let's just copy, go into node examination and hit paste. Let's make it a child of item mesh. And now the reason we're making a second examination actor is because it'll be much easier to just update this text on the notes rather than adding and removing text in the correct position, whether it's a note or not. All right, so let's put this note into the world relative to this scene capture component. And let's make it a child of it. So I'm just going to drag it and scroll all the way down to scene capture 2D4, which is the one it is right now. And I'll just change the location to 000 and just drag it out a bit for now. And we'll figure out exactly where that should be later. In the scene capture component, we want to change the texture target, which we forgot to do, to the note render target. And let's change the primitive render mode to render scene primitives legacy. And we're doing this because in my experience, the other option doesn't render text as well as this does. So we're just saying, just don't render the sky sphere, which means we're gonna have to rotate this away from our building so that is not seen either. So if you have a sky sphere in your scene, you want to go here to hidden actors, press the plus button, and then you just use the eyedropper to select the sky sphere. We don't have one in our scene, so we don't have to worry about it. So now we need to duplicate the material for the render target because we don't have one for our notes. So let's go into content, materials, M examination, and we'll hit duplicate, and we'll call this M note examination. We can open that, and the texture sample is going to be our note examination, or our note render target 2D. That thin little line there is our piece of paper. We can actually just rotate this so it's a little easier to see, like that. There we go. So now we need a widget to display this material, which is the same way we did it with the other one. So we can duplicate W examination right here. I'll hit duplicate, and we'll call it W note examination as we have for all the other things. And we'll bring it out of this inventory folder just into UMG. We can open up node examination, and let's just go ahead and delete the item name and item description because we don't need them. So delete and delete. Now we have our image, our background blur, and our drag detection. We'll leave all three of those so we don't have to recode them all. For the image, we can change the size to 124 by 124. Hence why I said change the size in the render target. And the image is going to be not M examination, but M note examination. So it's the note instead. So in the graph, we're gonna have some errors because we removed some text. And we can actually delete everything after this update widget custom event because this just updates, and the other one, the name and the description and the static mesh, and we just don't need any of it. So we're gonna delete that. If we compile again, we're no more errors. We can also delete the inventory reference because we don't use it either. It automatically puts it under components. So we can delete that. We'll hit yes. And it's being used on mouse move. So we will come back to this and fix it. So So to reopen my event graph because it closed, just double click right here. What we do need is a reference to our note examination actor, which is this one right here, BP note examination. So we'll create that. We'll just call it BP note examination ref. And we'll just search for that, BP note examination object reference. We also want to make it exposed on spawn. And in this update widget, we don't need an index, but we do need it to be a reference to the note master, which just reminding you, it's basically the pickup actor, so that we can get the text variable to add to the examination. So we'll change this index. We will call it note, or we'll call it note master actor. Actually, no master because we'll have children of it, so just note actor. But we will make it of type BP note master. Now before we continue in this update widget, we still have the errors, but don't worry about that. Let's go back into note master and let's actually make something happen when you hit E when you get close enough, because right now it doesn't do anything. We do have enabling and disabling input active, so when you get close enough to it to hit E, it is registering that you hit something, but it doesn't do anything. So we will create input action, which is our E key. And when we press it, we just want to create the widget note examination. So pressed, it will create widget. And we will search for note examination. And now we have this BP note examination reference because we made it exposed on spawn. Now we don't have the variable to plug into that yet because this is asking for the note examination actor, which is the this one right here, not the master. So it is not self, it's the other one. And I'm just going to start closing these font things because they're getting in the way. Play yes to apply changes to the font. And this is the door key, we can get rid of that. Pickup actor master, we can get rid of that. Render target, we can get rid of that. So we have master, note examination, we can get rid of the material, we can get rid of the old widget, and we have this widget now. Okay, that makes it a lot more clearer. Should be easier to follow now. So after we create the WNote examination widget, we want to call update widget, which is this one right here. And this one we can put self for the note actor because it's asking for this note actor, which holds the text variable. After we update the widget is when we can add it to the viewport. So add to viewport. Now let's get the variable to plug in this right here. So in the begin play, which is right here, we just have to get this note examination actor. Now there's only ever one in the world, which is the one this camera is facing. This is the only BP note examination that will exist. And because of that, we can find it by using a get all actors of class, searching for BP note examination, and then out of the out actors we can get a copy, and we will get the first index because there only is the first one, and then we'll use that and promote it to a variable, and we'll call this BP note examination ref, and now we have our variable for that, which we can plug in to this right here. So now let's fix the error in our WNote examination, which is in our on mouse move because it takes a reference from the inventory, which we don't need, because what we are adding rotation to is the note examination actor. So we can delete these, get our new BP note examination ref variable, and get the static mesh. Or what did we call it? It's called item mesh. Item mesh. and that's what we will be rotating. Since the text is a child of the item mesh, it'll rotate with it, so you don't have to worry about the paper rotating around the text. Alright, so let's go back to the event graph, and in update widget, all we have to essentially do is update what the text says on our note examination. Because this note master will have a lot of children, depending on how many notes you have, each one with different texts, and this note examination just updates the text, so you don't have to constantly replace which note is showing, you just replace the text. So we have this note actor reference, which is a reference to our note master right here. And we can just get the text variable from that. So we can get the note text, and we will set this text to the text in the BP note examination. So we'll get the BP note examination ref, and we'll get the text from here, which we call note text. So we'll get note text, which is the object, and then we will set the text inside of that. So set text, and this will be the value. Now in the close examination widget, so when we close this widget right here, instead of toggling the inventory, we just want to remove it from the parent because this has nothing to do with our inventory. So to test this out, we just have to make 2 notes to make sure it updates correctly. So let's go into content, blueprints, actors. I'm gonna change this back to lit, notes, and we have our note master right here, and we create children of this, and we will just call this BP note. I'm just gonna call it first note and second note. So I'll duplicate first note, call this second note, and I will delete the master from the world and replace it with the first note. Just make sure that's not overlapping. Okay, great. And let's just open first note. Let's change the text. So this one can, oh, my camera speed is very slow. This one can say, hello, welcome to the mansion. Something like that. We are now in a mansion setting. Oh, I just realized we need to change it in the, I thought I was changing the variable text, but I was changing the text in here, but it's all controlled through this variable, so you need to type it in this variable. So, hello, welcome to the not haunted mansion. And we will want to add a line break before haunted. There we go. And then the second note will say, turns out the mansion is haunted. And I will add a break here as well. Okay, perfect. So now if we take these 2 notes, I already put the first one right there. If we take the second one right here. Okay, I'm gonna hit play, and I will just go to the first note first. And if we hit E, it should create this widget for us, and it says, hello, welcome to the not haunted mansion. And that's great. If we hit backspace, it goes away. Now if we go to the second note, the widget should update, and it should say whatever's on this note, which is, turns out the mansion is haunted. So this examination widget is working correctly, which is great to see. Now we just gotta polish it up a bit and add the ability to rotate the note. So let's go into content, game BP, and we're gonna open the player controller. And we have this toggle inventory custom event, which does essentially what we want it to do in our widget here, minus the actual inventory opening. So let's just get these here and copy all this. And let's copy this set input game modes as well. So this is everything I have copied. The movement modes, look input, mouse cursor, and input modes. I'm going to Control C. I'm going to go into WNote examination, which is this one right here. And let's just find a free spot and paste all that in. And bring this closer. And all this stuff on the bottom where we disable the movement and ignore the look input, we want to happen when we come into the widget here. So let's just take all this and drag it up to the event construct. And we'll get this bind event after. So I'm going to pull this up and I'm going to break those. And then after we cast to the player controller, we will do these things. And I'm just going to move these over here for now. So we cast to the player controller, we get the player character and disable the movement. Ignore look input, we'll need a player controller reference, so we'll plug that in. Same with show mouse cursor, we need to recall it, so set show mouse cursor. And just replace it with this one. Set that to true. And we also set input mode to game and UI. Put this into player controller. Widget to focus will be self, because this is the widget we want to focus to. And we also don't want to be able to open the inventory. So with this cast to the player controller, we can actually make it a variable to make it easier on ourselves. So we can promote that to a variable, and we'll call it player controller ref, and then we can just use that. So let's get the player controller ref, set can open inventory to false, so we can't open the inventory while we're in there. And after all that, we will bind this to the close examination widget. And then if we do close the widget, that's where we want to do all of this. So I'm just gonna create a reroute node here to clean this up. And once again, let's get the player controller, plug these all in. So we want to reset the look input so we can once again look around. We have to replace the show mouse cursor, so set show mouse cursor to false because we don't want to show it anymore, and set the input to game only. And then with the player controller reference, we want to be able to open the inventory, so set can open inventory to true. Alright, so now we can finally test it to see if, oh, one thing is wrong. This target right here, which needs to be our player controller ref. I accidentally unplugged that and forgot to replace it. Alright, so now we should be able to test it out. So when we go into this examination widget, can I move around? No, I cannot. I also cannot look around. The mouse is here. I cannot open the inventory. And if I can click and drag, you can see I can rotate our note, which is wonderful. And then if I hit backspace to get out of it, I have all my abilities again, and I can open the inventory and such, which is great. Turns out the mansion is haunted. Now I know this episode is getting pretty long, but there is one more thing I would like to do before we continue, and that's add more text on the back of one of the notes. So let's go to the Note Master, and let's duplicate our note text. So we'll call this back note text. And what we're going to do is just rotate this -90 on the Y, I believe. Oh, that was wrong. Let's see. Okay, it is -90 on the Y, but also -90 on the X and 0 on the Z. Then we gotta position it correctly on the back side. And let's try X10, and that already looks good. Of course, instead of 0.001 on the Z, we want -0.001, So it's just slightly on the back side. So we can no longer see it on the top, and we can't, and it's hard to see, but it is on the bottom here. Oh wait, actually, I don't believe it is, because it is still kind of in the thickness of the paper, which I believe is 0.1. So instead of 0.001, it should be 0.11. There we go. Yes, now we can see it. Now we need a new variable to set this back note text, so we can duplicate the note text variable. And we'll call this back note text. We'll delete that 0 at the end. And in the construction script, we're just going to do this same thing, but for the text on the back. So instead of note text, it's going to be back note text. And instead of the note text variable, it'll be the back note text variable. The default for the back note text, though, will be empty, so most notes, there will be no text on the back, but you will always have the option to add one if you want. So let's copy the back note text real quick so we can add it in our BP note examination. So let's hit paste. It should be in the correct spot, which it is. Make sure it's a child of the item mesh. And we also have to make sure that's updated as well. So in our W note examination, we have our update widget here. And we have our BP note examination ref and our note text. But now we also have the back note text. So we will get back note text and set text. So we're doing essentially the exact same thing. And the text we want to set is our variable from our BP note master, back note text. All right, I believe that should work. So let's test this out. So let's go into content, blueprints, actors, notes. And on the first note, I'm going to leave it blank. So I'll open that up. And here in the back note text, which has appeared, it should be empty by default, which it is. And then in the second note, I'll change this to our code for the lock. And that is how you will find the code in the lock. So our back note text will say, oh wait, we don't want to change the text itself. I almost did that again. We want to change the variable here. So back note text will be 9516, which is our code. You can see it on the back right there. So let's test that out. Let's hit play. We can still go see our text right here. Welcome to the Not Haunted Mansion. Well, thank you for inviting me. And then by the time we are in and we find that it's haunted, we have found this box, but we don't know the code. We find this note. Turns out the mansion is haunted. We inspect it. 9516. That's the code, isn't it? It's also important to note that you don't want to get some overlap things mixed up. So I'm actually going to move all these things outside of this overlap sphere, because that definitely can make a difference. And very lastly, one more thing you can do to sell the effect is we can choose to hide the note mesh when we're reading it so that it looks like we've picked it up. We can still see it in the back here, but it would be cool if it disappeared when we quote unquote pick it up and then reappear when we put it back down. So if you go into W note examination, we can make a variable from this update widget. So let's just bring all this out just a bit. So the current node actor, we're going to promote it, and we will just call it current note. So which note are we looking at right now, so we know which note to hide. Then when we open the note, after we do all this, before we get to this part, I'm just going to pull this out. I'm just going to say, get this current note, and we're going to set actor hidden in game. Hidden will be true. And then we can just copy and paste this, Command C. And at the end here, we're going to make it revisible once we close the note. So change the new hidden to false. And let's just test that out, hit play. And when we hit E, the note is now gone behind us, and when we go out of it, it reappears. It gives us a much better illusion that we're actually picking up the note. Before we end this episode, be wary of your level design. I already mentioned this, but certain things won't work if they overlap. You have a lot of workarounds, such as making these overlap spheres smaller, just changing your map layout in general, etc. But for example, I think I'm just going to move this over here. The box isn't going to move with it, but just to show you, when it's inside this overlap sphere and we interact with it, it won't always register me trying to click on these widgets here because my mouse is actually interacting with this sphere that I'm already inside and it's stopping it. So you have to be wary of level design. And I'm just going to change this to unlit so I can reposition it correctly. So you'll have to be wary of level design and placement of your objects. So thank you for watching this one. I know it was a long one. A reminder, you don't have to do notes this way. You can do it a much simpler way of just creating a widget that you don't need to rotate or anything. But now you have the option to do either. And I will see you in the next episode.